Hello, my loves. We record our episodes fairly far in advance because of all the research that we do, among other things. And so I'm hopping in here to share a quick couple of updates before the episode starts. How is everyone? I know a lot of people are really worried right now for a lot of good reasons. And if you need a little bit of a break from the current moment, I hope this episode and next week's episode give you a little breathing room. If you need permission, because sometimes I feel like I do, you can have a little escapism as a treat. You deserve it. I want to take a minute to give a shout out to Nathan in Colorado. Nathan, I hope all is well in your world. Thank you so much for reaching out on Instagram to say hey. It means a lot to hear from people. I really enjoyed chatting with you briefly, and I am always excited to know there is someone out there enjoying the show. I also wanted to let you all know that this Wednesday we launched the Didn't Read It newsletter. It is called The Epilogue, and you can find it at gracetodd.substack.com. I will be using that space to post intermittent follow-ups, stray thoughts, and other nonsense, mostly about episodes we've done in the past. I have a bad habit of finishing an episode and suddenly thinking of one more point I really wanted to make. And so that is where those will live. Soon, we will also be using it to post bonus episodes. So if that is something you are interested in, go subscribe and stay tuned. Again, that is gracetodd.substack.com. Also, with the holiday season coming up, I wanted to remind everyone that we do have merch, and I'm reminding you of this because I am hoping to get a little more help making the show, and the only way I can do that is if you are willing to maybe give your loved ones or yourself a t-shirt, hat, sticker, etc. I know that not everyone loves kicking off a show with a little bit of begging. I promise this is not going to turn into the public radio fund drive. This will not be every week, just this one time. But if there's someone on your list who is a big book nerd, maybe consider sending them a little something. Anyway, thank you all, as always, for being here with me. We have some fun stuff planned for the next few months, and I am excited to share it with you. And now, without any further ado, on to the show.
Books, 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 books.
Hello, and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that has been fundamentally tainted by its choice of media. I am your host, Grace Todd. And with me again today this week is bestie of the pod, Maddie Wood.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, baby.
Hi.
How you doing?
I am so ready to regale you with a tale or two. Just one. One gothic tale.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited too, honestly. This one delighted me. I had read this book long ago and had not in many moons, and I think I liked it a lot better this time.
Oh, I love it when that happens.
I feel like is very rare. I feel like when you read something in your young adulthood, it leaves so much more of an impression sometimes, or at least maybe in your memory.
Yeah, I do feel though like classic lit specifically tends to age better in a way because there's so much. I don't mean to sound like a completely cranky old woman, but I do feel like there is an extent to which a lot of literature contemporarily is not written for grown-ups. It's written for like people under 40.
Yeah, that's fair. But we're always trying to make like 17-year-olds read it and relate to it, and it's like not quite for them really either. But unless like you're a person who's making an effort, I feel like once you're out of school, a lot of people don't touch classic literature again ever.
Yeah, and classic lit specifically tends to be full of big thoughts for adults who have, experienced loss and midlife crises and either had children or knew people who had children and have watched them navigate that shit show. And, you know.
Meanwhile, it's like, hey, 17-year-old, why isn't this resonating with you more?
Like, hey, kiddo, I know you're trying to figure out how to just, like, not off yourself, but have you considered, like, the big existential underpinnings of the economy that keeps you alive? And they're like, what?
Have you thought about how capitalism will affect your marital life? No?
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 You don't want to read Dostoevsky?
No? You just want to play Edward 40 Hands and be left alone? I understand.
Yeah.
You want to build a wizard staff in your parents' basement somewhere.
Oh, bless.
That's okay. Well, we're going to get like some young adult growing pains.
Ooh, I
Like,
love a growing pain.
That I found the relatable in this here tale.
I feel like I'm still having growing pains.
Yes. Physically, too. I know that's crazy because I'm 5'1" and I've been 5'1" since the 4th grade, but sometimes my knees ache in a way that feels like a growing pain. And I'm like, what if instead of getting shorter as I get older, as is common practice, I got slightly taller?
Maddie, I have very bad news
Shut
for
up.
you about what knee pain means once you're over the age
I
of like
am rejecting
19.
whatever you're saying.
Those are not growing pains, babe.
Okay.
That's
That's
just what happens.
apparently I come on this podcast for you to hurt me.
That's just what happens when
Okay.
your knees are over the age of 29.
What if it's the back of my knees, though? That's where growing pains happen, in my experience.
You know what? I'm going to let you have this.
You never know. I'm going to be 5'2" next year.
You know what? You're the captain this week. So they are growing pains.
Thank you.
You're going to get so tall.
Oh my gosh.
I hope you're
I went-
drinking lots of milk, getting all your
Actually-
calcium.
I have consumed more regular cow milk in the last 4 or 5 months than I have since I was still living under my parents' roof.
That is a very young person thing to say and be aware of.
Yep. Very cool, hip thing to be talking about. But Fairlife has so much protein in it. Would you like to sponsor the podcast, Fairlife? Anyone? Anyone? Lactose-free, protein-heavy milk?
My God.
Okay, fine. We'll start.
Maddie back on the pod with the relatable hip content the kids crave.
That's right. Just watch. There'll be some boy band references later.
Aging knees and cow's milk. You can tell you're young and cool when you refer to it as cow's milk.
Well, what do you want me to say? Nut milk? Disgusting.
All right.
Disgusting.
Look,
All right, so today we are here. The best segue of all time. To talk about one of the lesser known works of probably one of, I would venture to guess, most read classical literature authors today.
oh yeah.
I think that Jane Austen is like, people are still really,
People love Jane Austen.
people love Jane Austen.
And much like Georgette Hare, people love a lot of things that are directly imitating and riffing on Jane Austen.
But I am going to pose a couple things in this as we talk about this book that I don't actually think that Jane Austen is what her current day memory is.
Yes, her cultural reputation is a bit of a leap.
And I also, I actually did prepare this time, everyone, so get excited. That I don't actually think that she liked writing the romantic parts of the books that she is so well known for being romances. Because if you think about all of Jane Austen's novels, she finishes the quote-unquote happy ending in like 4 paragraphs. She's like, I'm done with snark, and so I guess I have to tie this up.
Here's your happy ending, I guess.
And that a lot of the reasons that I think people love her, I mean, I love her, and I've read everything that she's written, which is not a lot. There's 6 of them, but so much more of it has to do with how it's been reflected in TV and film over the years, and not really about the literature itself anymore.
Yeah. One of my big gripes about every adaptation of Pride and Prejudice I have basically ever seen is that they are forever cutting out all of the class stuff, which is kind of the most important part. A lot of
They make it seem so much more like, oh, Darcy just like doesn't like her for her.
Like,
and
her mom's annoying.
Right. And then they just glaze over the like very pointed cultural, like class related, like, you're poor.
Yeah, it's like it's the class and the satire element just gets lost most of the time. Even when they kind of, you know, a lot of the adaptations are gently funny and they're like, oh, you know, Darcy is very, very rich, but there's so much in that novel that is specifically about like the interplay of all these different people's social roles, and it just gets ironed over to be like, oh, but it's so romantic.
And I do wonder if she were looking down on us now, what she would think about the way that we've turned Darcy into this like ultimate romantic hero, because I don't actually think that's what she meant to write or how she really meant to write him. I think he's like a parable, but I don't think if she knew that he was now this like, oh, I'm just looking for my Mr. Darcy, which like, why are you? Look somewhere else. Look for a different person. You know, I don't think that's what she intended.
No. And now that we've alienated a solid like 80% of anyone listening,
the 4 people that are left
who likes Jane Austen,
I want to say
Maddie.
I love Jane Austen. I've been to Bath. I've been to the Jane Austen Museum where there's a bunch of weird old like American Girl dolls in Regency era costumes.
What?
Yes. That are like on display. It was the oddest museum. But I've been there. I loved it so much I went to Bath. But today we are going to read Northanger Abbey.
Ooh.
Which is, I would say, the least popular. It's probably a tie between this and Mansfield Park.
Yeah.
Mansfield Park has a lot of very interesting race-related things in it.
Oh.
But this one, while did not get published until 1817, after her death,
Okay.
it is believed that it's the first one she wrote.
Oh.
And so she sold it to a publisher who like ran ads about how they were going to publish it and then never did. And she had to fight with them to get the rights to it back. She had to pay them the £10 to get the rights back, and her brother ended up being the one to kind of finish that off after she dies. And then it got published at the same time as Persuasion.
Why didn't they publish it?
Unclear. There's some supposition that the publisher themselves were like on hard financial times and couldn't actually afford to. But when she pressed them about it later and how she was just going to like have it published somewhere else, they kind of pushed back and were like, no, like it's ours. We own it. You sold it to us. And so there was like an ensuing fight. And so it didn't get published until after she died.
Weird.
But we do think, based on how this is written, it's like much more juvenile and it's a lot sort of sillier, and like it breaks the fourth wall a lot in a way that the other ones, like she just like has full-on conversations with the audience as the omniscient narrator in parts that are just like her opinions on stuff.
That's great.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed this. The whole point of this and what it normally gets cataloged is kind of poking fun at the Gothic novels that were all the rage at the time.
Okay.
So we're going to hear a lot about Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, which was a very popular sort of, these were like very overwrought mystery romances, very heavy themes, but very, very dramatic.
Yes, I think we've done some
Yes.
Gothic and Gothic adjacent
Yes.
texts on this show, and
Yes.
they are very dramatic indeed.
The dramatic. And as famous as the opening lines of Pride and Prejudice are, the opening like paragraph of this book and the way it immediately throws shade is delightful. So we're going to open and we're going to learn a little bit about our heroine.
All right.
No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her born to be a heroine. Just like, this bitch basic. And she's gonna double down on this like 4 more times.
Right out the gate.
Like,
I love it.
First sentence. Her situation in life, the character of her father and mother, her own person and disposition were all equally against her. Her father was a clergyman without being neglected or poor, and a very respectable man, though his name was Richard, and he had never been handsome. I don't know why this made me laugh. I laughed out loud when I read this sentence, like, ugh, Richard. Like,
she has such a thing. She has like an explicit thing against the name Richard.
it's so funny.
Because there's that whole thing with Dick in Persuasion.
Yes.
Who
Who
hurt
wronged you? Who wronged you, Jane?
Thinking about just, I'm so sorry, but like very quick, with this being maybe one of the first things she ever wrote, and Persuasion being one of the last things
It's
she
like
ever
a
wrote,
lifelong
like,
hatred.
who named Richard wronged her so badly that it spanned her entire writing career, and she was no less full of rage by Persuasion.
She was like, I'm still as pissed. And maybe that's why they published the two of them together. Nice bookends in my hatred for Richard pack.
Are there any Richards in any of the other? I want to go hunting for Richards in Austen now.
Isn't Richard Captain Fitzwilliam's first name?
Oh, maybe.
The cousin in Pride and Prejudice? I think his name is Richard. But he's a fine character. Do we have ambivalence about Richards throughout our life? A bell curve of Richard, if you will.
Who is Richard?
And what did he do?
I'm a Richard truther.
New conspiracy theory. Ding ding. So she basically goes on to set the stage that Catherine, she's 17. She lives in a fairly small town. She doesn't come from significant wealth, but she's not poor. She's just a very average. And there's nothing about her upbringing that is remarkable in any way.
Just wildly middle of the road.
Just like so bland. So bland. And then she says, but from 15 to 17, she was in training for a heroine. She read all such works as heroines must read to supply their memories with those quotations which so serviceable and so soothing in the vicissitudes of their eventful lives.
Okay.
So this book, you will find, is just like an ode to reading too. This was like, I feel like she's young and she's like, you know what makes me different? I'm a girl who reads.
So it's an ode to read. This is a good thing that she is in rehearsal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
There's going to be a very long defense of the novel that comes many times.
Good for her.
Yeah. So she's 17. She's very clear to say she's like never really met a boy or like had a flirtation. She has a lot of siblings, but they live in a small town. There's not very many families around. And she is very much a product of her even own parents' like naive upbringing. It's like generational
Naivete?
yes.
Okay.
She's really doubling, trivialing down.
So her parents are like the Regency equivalent of like Mormons.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, but not the secret wives of Mormons.
Yeah, just like the really bland kind of
Yes,
Mormon.
the really bland. I'm going to put half and half in my soda pop.
Sorry, what?
Oh yeah, that's a thing. They have soda bars, you know, in Utah, and like you go and you get like a Dr. Pepper with like half and half and a bunch of flavored syrups in it because you can't have coffee or booze. So have a 44-ounce soda for some reason. That's okay. I don't know. It's very confusing.
Okay.
Anyway, we are very briefly introduced to their neighbors, the Allens, who have slightly more income than they do, and they are going to Bath, and they invite Catherine to go with them as like a first adventure. I want you to know that at the bottom I wrote in the margin, she basic off to Bath.
All right. Gonna go be basic in Bath.
Correct. And so we learn that she's going to go to Bath, and her mom even like doesn't warn her like, ooh, there's going to be like gentlemen and men, and you need to be careful about who you talk to and where. Like there's no sense of like have a care.
So just like definitionally like an ingenue. Just,
Yes.
I have no idea what's happening.
Yes. Mrs. Allen it just says, dress was her passion. She's so vapid. She's like very concerned. She's not conventionally vain. She just like cares a lot about clothes and like truly like dress is my passion, graphic design is my passion. Like she doesn't have any other like hobbies, and this gets more and more annoying to Catherine. At the beginning, she's like, they're so kind because they're taking me to Bath and I'm learning new things. And she takes her to the modiste and she gets a couple new little dresses. But by like the end of the first ball, she's like, oh my God, shut up.
A woman who would have delighted in the existence of fashion forums.
Oh my God, yes.
Okay, yep.
Yes, who wants to argue about like sprigged muslin versus...
Oh, so it's like technical.
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes. We're in Bath. They go to their first, not full ball, but like they're at like a social outing. It becomes very clear that coming with the Allens, while delightful, has no social value because she doesn't know anyone. And so she keeps just repeating, oh, I wish you had someone to dance with, but I just don't know anyone. And this person's not here or this person's not here. And by the end of it, at first Catherine's like, yeah, it's okay. And by the end of it, she's like, stop talking. Stop reminding me of what I don't have.
That's interesting because I feel like a lot of her other heroines tend to be like just well connected enough.
Yeah.
They always have in somewhere, but she's just this poor lamb is just stuck on the sidelines.
Correct. It says, Mrs. Allen did all that she could do in such a case by saying very placidly every now and then, I wish you could dance, my dear. I wish you could get a partner. For some time, her young friend felt obliged to her for these wishes, but they were repeated so often and proved so totally ineffectual that Catherine grew tired of her at last and would thank her no more. All I could see was like the gritted teeth of a teen, like trying to be pleasant because your parents have told you to have good manners, and at the same time being like, shut up, and just wants to dance. And so she's like very quickly irritated by the Allens' lack of acquaintances.
It reminds me of being on vacation with my grandparents as a 16-year-old and like seeing a group of actual teenagers and the grandparents just being like, oh, it'd be nice if there was someone your age for you to hang out with. And you're like, I know.
I could go over there. But like you can't say that because you're at some like, I don't know, you're somewhere with your grandparents.
Yep.
Yeah. So they're leaving and she's remarking how her vanity is like a little bit wounded because she's like the new girl in town and still no one really gave a shit and didn't like ooh and ah over her. But then as she's like leaving, she hears these two young gentlemen that say she's like, basically, that's a pretty girl. Like very passing, but it totally tempers her.
Ooh,
so
okay.
We'll learn that like she's very easily swayed because she's 17.
Sure.
Who isn't?
And she just wants to be told she's pretty.
Correct. Who amongst us doesn't?
I just want to be told I'm pretty.
True. Every day. Hope my husband's listening.
Hey, you're real pretty.
My God, thank you. You're real pretty.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You have kind eyes.
So do you.
Oh. Platonic friendships. So then we get into just sort of their like new routine in Bath. They're going shopping, they're promenading. They're going shopping, they're promenading. You know, they're falling. Mrs.
Sure.
Allen has no other hobby. This is all that they do.
What else is there to do?
Exactly. So they go one day to the lower rooms, which is there's like upper rooms and lower rooms in Bath. And this is like where you go during the day to promenade and see who's about. And they're introduced to a gentleman, Henry Tilney.
Ooh.
And Henry is, I think, like one of the more interesting and funny Austen heroes.
Okay.
He's like very sassy.
I love some sass.
So they are having tea and they're sort of chatting back and forth, and he basically is like, oh my God, how awful of me. I haven't asked you, like, how are you liking Bath? Implying like, oh, I've skipped some of the banal like chit chat. And that she's going to go home and write in her journal, like, oh, like this dude was so awkward and didn't even ask me questions about myself. And she's like, my journal? Like, what are you talking about? And he says, yes, I know exactly what you will say. Friday, went to the lower rooms, wore my sprigged muslin robe with blue trimmings, plain black shoes, appeared to much advantage, but was strangely harassed by a queer, half-witted man who would make me dance with him and distressed me by his nonsense. Indeed, I shall say no such thing. Shall I tell you what you ought to say? If you please. I danced with a very agreeable young man, introduced by Mr. King, had a great deal of conversation with him, seems a most extraordinary genius. Hope I may know more of him. That, madam, is what I wish you to say.
That is very funny.
Yeah, it was like, so many of her other heroes are like dour with responsibility.
Yeah.
By the mantle of their like wealth or their family name or their like propriety. And Henry Tilney is none of those things.
I wonder if she found, as she got more literary experience under her belt, I wonder if she found that those heroes just worked better for the reading public.
Yeah.
Like her readers didn't take as much to a funny, approachable sort of...
Yeah, but you got to think this didn't get published till after her death, so she wouldn't have that.
Yeah, but she would have had other people reading, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
Like, I'm sure she had friends and family who were reading her manuscripts.
I was also thinking, like, just as you get older, the likelihood of finding an unencumbered man grows smaller and smaller. And so maybe it was just like, this is less likely.
That's, I mean, true. Yeah.
Yeah. So they go back and forth. They leave it sort of ambiguous, but she's like immediately quite smitten, which is fun.
Okay.
As they're leaving, they run into a woman who Mrs. Allen recognizes, and it turns out she's a Mrs. Thorpe who Mrs. Allen had gone to school with, and her daughters. And so now this will introduce their social partners for the rest of their time in Bath.
Got it. We finally got somebody to chat with.
Yes, and so they're sitting there, and one of her daughters comes up, and Isabella is like, oh, well, you look just like him. And she's like, what are you talking about? Turns out that her brother James is friends with their brother John, and James had spent like the Christmas holiday with them.
Oh.
And so they are like linked in multiple ways, we find.
Sure, because they all were.
Yes. Everyone's a cousin. Catherine and Isabella become very fast friends. And Isabella is like a person that I feel like we have all known.
Okay.
And all experienced in some way this kind of what will turn out to be like a very fickle friend.
Sort of a frenemy situation.
Yes. But it says, friendship is certainly the finest balm for the pangs of disappointed love. Because once they meet, a time goes by that she sees Mr. Tilney nowhere. He's not in the lower rooms. He's not at any of the social events. Like, it's like he's disappeared.
Oh, no.
And she's very, like, forlorn about this. But she has this new friend, and she's 17, and that's very distracting. She does throw this, just, like, so petty and funny. Mrs. Thorpe loves to talk in the same way that Mrs. Allen loves dress.
Okay.
And when she's done, she like gives a brief account of the Thorpes, and she says, this brief account of the family is intended to supersede the necessity of a long and minute detail from Mrs. Thorpe herself of her past adventures and sufferings, which might otherwise be expected to occupy the 3 or 4 following chapters, in which the worthlessness of lords and attorneys might be set forth, and conversations which had passed 20 years before be minutely repeated.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
I just wrote petty as Jane. But this is a level of sort of unbridled pettiness that she like grows out of this.
I don't know. I was thinking that sounds so much like Mrs. Musgrove in Persuasion, which is very much a woman who never shuts up and is also the butt of one of the only fat jokes I can think of in all of Austen.
Yes.
Just out of left field, and you're like, what?
So one of the things that Isabella and Catherine find that joins them in friendship is their love of novels.
Okay.
And
they're both on Book Talk.
She goes on this rant that is more meant for the audience. This is again where she sort of breaks the fourth wall. It says, yes, novels, for I will not adopt that ungenerous and impolitic custom so common with novel writers of degrading by their contemptuous censure the very performances to the number of which they are themselves adding. So it's like, I won't shit talk this like all you other people. But just, it's this thing that they both love, and they both love a Gothic novel, we will come to find. And Catherine is reading Udolpho, and Isabella gives her this list of other Gothic novels that she should read. And in some of my research, I guess that a lot of these were not widely published, or they were like published as parts of journals.
Okay.
And people for the longest time thought that the list she had made up.
Oh.
And then it was discovered recently, fairly recently, that all of these were actually real publications of the time.
They were just all in like lit mags.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, zines.
That's one of the reasons I am so obsessed with all of the British Library's short story collections is that they are pulled from the British Library's archives, which are brimming with 200 years worth of lit mags. And a lot of that stuff can't be found anywhere else.
Yeah.
And a lot of it gets lost.
I believe that. She also throws this like small bit of shade in here about how men, and I think this is interesting, I think in regards to how people think about women who read romance or smut now.
Mm-hmm.
A man who reads like a 900-page unabridged history of England is like eulogized by 1,000 pens. And it will say things like, I am no novel reader. I seldom look at novels. Do not imagine that I often read novels. And that anytime a woman is reading something and it's just like, oh, you're just like reading that smut or like that romance, like that's useless. I read real books because I'm a man.
Yeah, if there's one thing we love more than casually degrading fiction just for being fiction, it's casually degrading things that women like.
Yes. It says, now had the same young lady been engaged with a volume of The Spectator instead of such a work, how proudly would she have produced the book and told its name. Even then, women were internalizing the fact that it was shameful to read a novel.
Lesser than.
Yes.
Also, like, God, I wish people still sat around reading lit mags.
Right?
The world would be a better place.
Truly. Also, I think that we should find all of these ones and do them for the podcast next October, because I want to know what Orphan of the Rhine or Necromancer of the Black Forest is about.
I want to read both of those, especially Necromancer of the Black Forest.
I very much want to know what that is about.
I bet if we asked nicely, we could track it down in the archives of the British Library.
I'm sure that we could. So they basically, there's a whole thing where they're bonding about these Gothic novels and how amazing they are and how all the women in their acquaintance are reading these. Like, they are all the rage, and yet also at the same time something that's very, like, poo-pooed upon by all of the men universally in their lives, which felt good.
Yeah, it's funny to think that, yes, these are romances, but the Gothic part, this is early horror, essentially. And it's funny to think of the men being like, ugh, these women with their horror.
With their just, like, pulpy horror. It's like, okay. All right. But the books continue to be a distraction from the fact that Mr. Tilney is still nowhere to be found.
Oh my God.
We get like a little interlude that's the very first thing that makes you maybe pause about Isabella. They're having a walkabout. They're promenading. They go to leave, and all of a sudden Isabella's like, yes, I want to leave. There are these two men over there that just will not stop looking at me, and ugh, it's so annoying. And it's like, okay, obviously you're very into the fact that these two men are looking at you. And not only does she want to leave, but she wants to leave in the direction where these two young men have just left.
I see.
And Catherine says, only, she added, perhaps we may overtake the two young men. Oh, never mind that. If we make haste, we shall pass by them presently, and I am dying to show you this hat. And Catherine says, but if we only wait a few minutes, there will be no danger of us seeing them at all. So, like, why don't we just wait? Isabella says, I shall not be paying them any such compliment. I assure you, I have no notion of treating men with such respect. That is the way to spoil them. It's just like, okay.
Yeah, all
right. I know a girl like you. And I hate that that's how I feel, but I do. So the next character that gets brought into the story is John. John is Isabella's brother, John Thorpe. This is the one who Catherine's brother is friends with, James and John.
Oh.
Couldn't have come up with any other more distinguishing names. Very frustrating as a reader, can I say, Jane? And I wrote here, just for readers who remember other episodes I've been on, this is the return of horse content. Wouldn't be a Regency era without a little horse content.
We love a horse girl.
John is horny for horses. We also will come to find he's horny for hunting dogs.
Okay.
He's very much like an archetype.
Horse himbo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sinister horse himbo. He's not a dumbass.
Oh, spooky horse himbo.
Yeah, just like slithery.
Ooh.
Slithery horse himbo.
Oh.
Horse slitherer. Disgusting. But it says, but look at his forehand. Look at his loins. Only see how he moves. That horse cannot go less than 10 miles an hour. Tie his legs and he will get on. What do you think of my gig, Miss Morland? So much talk of gigs. So many carriages. I was like, will I ever be free of this? No. Catherine is very excited to see her brother. They're quite close. And obviously she wants to impress Isabella because they're still in that like very nascent stage of their friendship. She is impressed by John. He promises to take her out in his gig and dance with her at the party that everyone is going to.
Ooh.
As this conversation goes on and he like basically won't shut up about horses, she likes him less.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the chapter, Isabella makes a point of being like, oh, he's so smitten with you already. And it like flatters her 17-year-old brain.
Uh-oh.
And so when James comes back to the Allens and is like, so what'd you think of my bud John? She was like, oh yeah, he's great.
I love him.
He's so cool. I love when people say, look at the loins. It's just like, God.
I love it when a guy yells at me about cars for 45 minutes and doesn't ask me anything about myself. It's my favorite.
Yes. What really turns her is they have a brief conversation about books. And he says, I never read novels. I have something else to do. Oh. Novels are so full of nonsense and stuff. There has not been a tolerably decent one come out since Tom Jones. It's like, okay. But for all the others, they are the stupidest thing in creation.
Oh.
So not only are we like, they're just not for me. They're like, novels. And it's like, okay.
I love a man who's proud of never reading.
Nothing sexier than illiteracy. And so the chapter ends that she has gone back. She's reading Udolpho. She's finishing it. And it's the idea that I think a lot of us who read a lot are familiar with, where the book is so good and so engaging that even though she has plans, she doesn't even really want to go, which I found very relatable. Like that feeling of like, oh, I have to go do something. I just want to read my book.
But I want to find out what happens
next. They go to this party. John is there. Jane like talks to the audience and is really intent upon reminding us that she's trying to frame Catherine as a heroine, but she's like not quite ready yet. Despite Mr. Thorpe, who doesn't show up immediately, like no one else is asking her to dance.
No.
And it says, to be disgraced in the eye of the world, to wear the appearance of infamy while her heart is all purity, her actions all innocence, and the misconduct of another the true source of her debasement, is one of those circumstances which peculiarly belong to the heroine's life and her fortitude under it. What particularly dignifies her character. Catherine had fortitude too. She suffered, but no murmur passed her lips.
My goodness.
Yes, it's very like, oh, but such a stiff upper lip. Because she doesn't want to stand up with anyone else because she's told John that she would dance with him. But then he's late, and so she's just sort of like...
stuck in limbo.
Kind of scuffing her foot like...
Sure.
Oh. But John does come, and they do dance, and she doesn't like it.
She's just like, this sucks. This guy sucks.
Yeah, he like goes off to play cards and kind of like just... Despite the fact that he has made this promise to her, he just doesn't really pay attention. But then, who appears? Mr. Tilney.
Mr. Tilney!
Henry, with a woman.
Uh-oh.
Who we actually, like, very calmly just, like, immediately assume is his sister. I like that she's just like, well, it couldn't possibly be anyone else. Must be his sister.
Is it his sister?
Yes.
Okay.
It is.
Okay.
He stops and talks to her and Mrs. Allen, and he tells them that he actually had left the morning that after they met, that he had just been in town to sort of secure him and his sister and eventually their father and their other brothers' lodgings. They're having this great conversation and she's loving it, and that's when John comes back and is like, ready for that dance?
No.
And so it's like this perfect unhappy situation where Tilney's like in the process of asking her, John comes up and is like, you ready for that dance? So she has to say no, and then John just talks about horses and dogs the whole time.
Oh no.
Yes. She just like longingly stares across the room the whole time, and John does not pick up on it at all, which is great.
Seen this exact scene in so many rom-coms.
Yes, this is like, we love this moment, and now we know Jane.
Yeah.
Maybe not came up with it, but 1818.
So I've read some of the novels that immediately sort of lead into Jane Austen. Thematically, they're very, very closely related. But they don't tend to feature quite so much of this sort of relatable interiority. Like, oh no, I was going to dance with him, but then I was going to dance with him. And I really want to dance with him, but I've already made a promise to him. Yeah, it's not quite so preoccupied with the emotional register of that moment and kind of the awkwardness of that moment.
Which is the far more relatable piece.
Right.
Which is why I think her books have stood up.
Who hasn't had a moment that's kind of along those emotional lines?
Sort of uncomfortable. She finishes her dance and she does get to meet Miss Tilney, Henry's sister, which is her other big object, because she's like, ooh, maybe if I become buds with the sister, get in with the brother.
Yeah.
Yes. So they do get to talk, and just as they're finishing, Isabella swoops in, and she's one of these people, she's always calling her like, my dearest creature. So over the top in her, what I think she assumes is like flattery, but it starts to read like very insincerely as it goes on. And they return to the group, and Tilney goes and asks yet another person to dance who's not her. No. And so they miss each other a second time. And so at this point, she's like, this ball is stupid and tedious because I can't dance with the boy I want. And so I just want to go home.
Yeah, fair.
Which I have experienced this feeling in different ways. But the progress of Catherine's unhappiness from the events of the evening was as follows. It appeared first in a general dissatisfaction with everybody about her, while she remained in the rooms, while speedily brought on considerable weariness and a violent desire to go home. This, on arriving in Pulteney Street, took the direction of extraordinary hunger, and when that was appeased, changed into an earnest longing to be in bed. Who hasn't been at a party when you suddenly are like, I need to be gone from here. I hate it. And then you get home and you're like exhausted and you eat like a little rat over your sink, like a bunch of random snacks, and then fall into your bed.
Yeah.
I was like, I've lived this many times. Too many times, but many times. So that's fun. She now has decided like she really needs to get to know Miss Tilney, whose first name is Eleanor.
Which kind of love interest sister is she? Is she bitchy and standoffish?
No.
Or hopelessly good and mousy?
Yes, she is Georgiana Darcy.
Okay, got it.
Yep. Honestly, almost to a T.
Oh, wow.
I mean, not like the stuff with Wickham, but like they are very similar.
Okay.
So well accomplished. So lovely. So unproblematic.
So pure and sweet.
Yes. So she's like, I am gonna become friends with her. This is my in. She seems so nice. Like, she does actually, I think, genuinely want to be friends with her. It's not all a ploy to just get closer to Henry.
Sure. The hottest thing a man can have is a genuinely likable family.
I mean, truly. Truly. And so she's like, okay, I'm gonna try to like see her again. But what happens? But there's a rap at the door. And it's John, Isabella, and James.
No.
And they're just like, why aren't you ready to go? Remember, I said I would take you out in a ride in my gig.
No.
And she's like, ugh. And this is another moment that, again, I think all of us have experienced, where she's standing there with Mrs. Allen and she's making eyes at Mrs. Allen like, help me get out of this. Catherine's silent appeal to her friend, meanwhile, was entirely thrown away. For Mrs. Allen, not being at all in the habit of conveying any expression herself by a look, was not aware of its being ever intended by anybody else. And Catherine, whose desire of seeing Miss Tilney again could at that moment bear a short delay in favor of a drive. We've all been in that situation where you're like with someone you know and a third person, and you're making a face at the person you know like, help me. And they're just like so oblivious.
Mrs. Allen, who was too stupid to take a f***ing hint.
Yes, exactly. Who didn't understand how to read facial expressions.
Anytime I try to communicate something via facial expression, I get in trouble because my face is too expressive and then everyone knows what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, my mom regularly just goes, your face. And that's when I know that I'm being too transparent.
I had my boss look at me during a meeting once and just wave her hand in front of her own face and then just look at me pointedly. And I was like, ooh.
Oh, okay. Picking up what you're putting down. I'll try to steal this.
It's like, bitch, fix your face.
Fix your face. So she tries to get out of it, and Mrs. Allen is no help, and she like can't scramble fast enough to come up with a reason not to. And so she goes. Isabella and John are in James's rented gig, and John and Catherine are in his, and he like cannot shut up about how he can't believe James doesn't own his own carriage. And James's carriage is super rickety. She gets her first experience as a person who grew up in such sort of naive settings in dealing with someone who talks in a lot of hyperbole. And she really struggles with how to read him.
Oh.
Because on one hand, he's over here and he's just like talking so much shit about James's rented carriage. And is basically like, it's about to break down. And she's like immediately like, oh my God, the safety of my brother. Like, Catherine listened with astonishment. She knew not how to reconcile two such different accounts of the same thing. Because he's like, well, I mean, if I were driving it, I could drive that 10 miles and not miss a splinter. And she's like, well wait, which is it?
Some like nascent autism representation.
Yep. Her own family were plain, matter-of-fact people who seldom aimed at wit of any kind. Her father, at the utmost, being contented with a pun, and her mother with a proverb. They were not in the habit, therefore, of telling lies to increase their importance, or of asserting at one moment what they would contradict the next. And so she gets very she turns inward while they're still on the carriage ride and is like, who is this dude?
I can't cope with this.
No, it says, little as Catherine was in the habit of judging for herself, and unfixed as were her general notions of what men ought to be, she could not entirely repress a doubt, while she bore with the effusions of his endless conceit, of his being altogether completely agreeable. It was a bold surmise, for he was Isabella's brother, and she had been assured by James that his manners would recommend him to all her sex. But in spite of this, the extreme weariness of his company, which crept over her before they had even been out an hour, and which continued unceasingly to increase till they stopped at Pulteney Street again, induced her, in some small degree, to resist such high authority and to distrust his power of giving universal pleasure. So damning. I wrote in my notes, starts to question, does John suck?
Despite being usually incapable of forming her own opinions.
This one was so stark, she couldn't be bothered not to.
She couldn't help it.
So they get back, and Isabella's like, oh my God, it's so late. They ended up being out for like 2.5 hours. And then Mrs. Allen comes home and informs her that she just got back from the pump rooms and she had strolled with the Tilney siblings.
No.
And Catherine's like, fuck. So then she quizzes Mrs. Allen about them, and it becomes so clear that Mrs. Allen is like of no use. She is like, their parents might be in Bath, but they also might be dead. And Tilney might be the oldest son, but maybe not. Like, everything she says that Catherine's, like, working her for information, and everything's just like, well... And finally, like, Catherine's like, not only is she distraught, but this cements her opinion of how much she doesn't like John.
I love a catastrophically unhelpful Austen matron.
I feel like that's kind of the only one she knows how to write. It says, and to think over all she had lost, till it was clear to her that the drive had by no means been very pleasant, and that John Thorpe himself was quite disagreeable. It's like when you had a bad time and then something else bad compounds upon it, and you're just like, no, this.
I'm done.
Off to the theater.
Ooh,
Off to the theater.
we love a bit of theatre.
Isabel and Catherine finally have time to, like, gab and catch up, and Isabel's like, "Ooh, girl, this hair." And she's like, "My brother's already in love with you, and so is Tilney. Like, oh, I'd leave some men for me." And I'm like, okay, it's gross. And then she has this very odd exchange where Isabella basically is like, "I'm so glad you weren't in the carriage with James and I, because you would have called me out for fawning over your brother, and I would have been so embarrassed." And Catherine was like, "Oh, I'd never do something like that. Like, why are you saying that?" And Isabella's like, "Yes, you would. I know you better than, like, you know yourself." And then it's like, at the beginning of the conversation, James is on their other side and is like, "James, don't talk to me. I have to catch up with my girl." And so then they have this exchange, and then she turns around and just talks to James the rest of the time.
Oh my god. That is such a type.
It is, though. I read it and I was like, I have known this person.
Look out, Catherine, because this woman is angling to become your sister.
And I don't think you'll love it.
Oh no.
So next day, they're at the pump rooms. She's third wheeling with Isabel and James, who, like, are more or less ignoring her, but they're, like, all walking together. And then she sees Miss Tilney. And this, like, sends Catherine over the moon. She's, like, so excited. She is that, like, 17-year-old of, like, very high highs and very low lows. Like, and so she's like, "I'm such bliss." And she, like, not so subtly asks, like, "Where's your brother?" And Miss Tilney definitely is old enough to read the signs. And Catherine thinks that she's done it so subtly that there's no way she would even know. And is like, "Well, will you and your brother be at the ball tomorrow?" Like, it's not.
Yeah, but remember thinking that you were being so clever
and
at 17?
So smooth and drinking vodka out of a water bottle? Yeah, I do.
Definitely pulling one over on the adults around you who were
We're like, yeah, I'm very aware of what's going on. Catherine, we have this, like, again, a breaking of fourth wall where Jane goes on this tangent because Catherine is angsting about what to wear to the ball. She's like, "Oh, Tilney's going to be there. I need to look hot." Where Jane's just basically like, "Men don't care whether you're wearing sprigged or flocked muslin." Like, they just, like,
men don't know the difference.
Like, waxes on the idea of, like, how ironic it is how much time women spend on this thing that, like, actually has no bearing on what men think. Which is an interesting and judicious observation.
Yeah.
It's like, all right. So we get to the ball. Catherine is desperately trying to ignore John. She's like, "I gotta find Tilney."
Oh, babe. Best of luck.
She sees John heading over to engage, and Tilney swoops in. Things
Yes.
go her way this time. He swoops in, and she's like, "Yes, please, dear God, lock it in." Before the dance commences, though, John appears and is like, "I thought you and I were dancing. I thought I had all your dances." And she's like, "No?" He's like, "Well, I've been in the card room bragging about how I'm going to dance with the prettiest girl here, and no one would believe how pretty the girl I'm going to dance." Like, he tries to do this weird, like, negging flattery sort of, but, like, does it in a way where he even, like, clearly doesn't believe it himself, because it peters out, and then all of a sudden he turns to Tilney and is like, "Are you interested in my friend's horse?" Fred's selling a horse. Enough about this. And so her and Tilney start to dance, and Tilney's like, "I couldn't bear for you to speak to him, like, any moment longer." And he makes this long metaphor about how dancing is like marriage. Being bound for the dance is a lot like being bound in matrimony.
Oh.
And this goes really over Catherine's head. They don't reveal this until the very end, but he's 26.
Oh.
And she's 17, which obviously at the time would not have been crazy.
No.
But the difference between what a 17-year-old thinks about a dance and this 26-year-old man trying to be like, it's all a metaphor. She was like, what? She's just like so out of her league intellectually.
It's very like, do you have an interest in children?
What we come to find is like that one of the things that Tilney finds so attractive about her is her like childlike naivete and how she just like always sees the goodness in everyone. Like it gets phrased in different ways, but the way it reads is just like she's just so this like childlike wonder. And it's like a real Rosamund if you listened to the last episode. Anyway, they have this like, honestly, besides this weird metaphor, like swoony, like she's like, this is the best dance ever, it's so romantic. But then she notices there's this like hot older man watching them. Who is that?
Ooh.
They finish the dance.
Who is the hot older man?
They finish the dance and he comes over and like whispers to Henry. And she, in a true like spiral way, immediately is like, oh God, he's like saying something terrible about me. In a true, like, very self-centered, but also very understandable way. That I was like, oh, very relatable as I doom spiral all the time. It turns out that's their dad. That's Henry's dad.
Uh-oh.
The General.
Oh, the General.
The General. We never get another name. Just the General.
Oh.
So they get introduced and they make plans to take a country walk with Catherine on the next day. And she's, like, over the moon. She's
with the General.
The General and Eleanor and Henry and her.
Oh.
Yes, little family walk. We're very excited by this.
A little family outing.
Mm-hmm. Of course, she wakes up and it starts to rain. And it's raining harder and harder. They're supposed to come and fetch her at noon. And it starts as a sprinkle. And as it gets closer to noon, it's raining harder and harder. And she's
a downpour.
Yes, and she's so distraught. The rain starts to clear. You know, it's not that long after, but it's past noon. And who comes but John and James and Isabel?
God damn it, John.
And they show up and they have this wild plan that they're all going to like ride out to this castle. And of course she's very intrigued because of all these Gothic novels she's been reading. And she's like, oh, to see a castle. But she's so torn because she's like, but I had plans and like, I don't want to like, you know, what if they show up? I don't want to not be here. That'd be rude. And John pipes up and he claims that he saw the Tilneys in their phaeton riding out of town. And so Catherine's like, well, I guess if they left, like, Udolpho lives in a castle. I want to see this fucking castle. So she, like...
Love a castle.
God. Horny for castles. Scrawling in the dark. So finally she's like, okay, so she gets in John's carriage and they ride out of town. And as they ride out of town, they see the Tilneys walking towards their house.
No!
And she like whips around and is watching them and she's begging John to stop, but he won't. He's like like it's almost like framed like a low-key kidnapping.
Oh, so she's really getting all of the beats of her Gothic romances here.
Yes.
Okay.
You'll see more.
Very Gothic romance. Very Evelina. Very being held against your will.
Very much so. Very Udolpho. So they get about 8 miles out of town and James is like, I think we should turn around. Like, this is taking way longer than I thought. It's getting dark. Like, we haven't really like planned because this was a wild, stupid plan anyway. And so John's like, ugh, fine. And basically bitches the whole ride home about how James should get his own gig and his own horses, and this rented gig is ruining his life. Again, we do not like John. John's a no for us.
John sounds like a real bummer. John also sounds like several dudes
You've known John.
I knew in high school.
Yeah, we all knew John in high school.
Yeah, and college, actually. And after college. I know some Johns right now.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So the next day... she's like, oh, I feel so awkward. Like, Mrs. Allen, what do you think? Like, should I go and try to apologize? Like, I know they saw me. We, like, made eye contact. I don't want them to think that, like, that I, like, totally bailed on them.
Oh, that's so cringeworthy.
I know. And so, but she arrives, and the butler, like, checks to see if Eleanor is in, and then says she's not. Catherine walks down the street, and then Eleanor and the general walk out of the house.
No.
And she sees them and she's so distraught. She doesn't really know what to do because she's like, I understand if Eleanor's offended. They go to a play that evening and they see the Tilneys from afar in their box. And Henry like won't make eye contact with her, she's kind of ignoring her. And she's like, oh, my heart. So once the play is over, she rushes to go apologize and tells him the story. And the more she tells the story, the more he softens because of her childlike earnestness. And then is like, please apologize on behalf of me to your sister. And he softens some more and explains that the general keeps a tight schedule and what the general says goes. And so he had wanted to leave. And so Eleanor had felt like she had to say no because she knew their dad couldn't really take the call. And so they agree, we're going to go on this walk together. Catherine, as they're leaving the place, catches out of the corner of her eye John talking to the general.
Uh-oh.
And then John comes over afterwards. She's more or less like, what were you talking about? Why are you talking about him? Why are you talking about him? And he tells her that the general knows everyone and that they were talking about her and that the general thinks she's the finest girl in Bath. Creep.
This is a good thing, though, isn't it?
It's a wonderful thing, but when reading it, I was like, ugh.
Ew. It is wild in a societal moment where it is considered borderline normal for people to straight up not show up to plans that you've made with them.
Yes.
To think about having to
Correct.
Having to bend over backwards to be like, I am so sorry that I was not at my house, even though it was raining and it was after the agreed upon time.
But I'm so sorry. And then you saw me and that's mortifying. I
mean, surely there's a happy medium between where we are now and then, but it's funny to think about.
Nope.
That level of do not offend people.
So the next time we see them, several days have passed. Catherine sees Eleanor at the pump room and commits to walking with her the next day. And then she goes back to her group, James, John, and Isabel, who are like, oh my God, we've just decided we're going to go on this excursion tomorrow.
No, not again.
And she's like, I can't go with you. Isabel throws a fucking fit and is like, I thought you loved me, but I guess you don't.
Oh my God.
I thought we were friends, but I guess you hold her in higher esteem than me.
Oh my God.
And all this stuff. And I'll give it to her. Catherine holds firm and it's like, no, I just made plans. I bailed the last time, or so I'm interpreting bailing. I'm not doing that again. I'm not doing it. And they're like, no, just go and tell her you forgot you had plans. And what's the difference between walking on Tuesday and walking on Wednesday? And she's like, yeah, but what's the difference between doing this excursion on Tuesday and doing it on Wednesday? And John has some stupid excuse. John peels off for a moment and then comes back.
Uh-oh.
And he tells the group that, oh, I just went and talked to Miss Tilney and told her you can't go tomorrow.
No. No, he did not.
He did.
He's lying.
No, he did.
Oh. What?
Yes.
Ew.
And told her that I told her you already had plans that you had forgotten about and that you could walk with her the day after that. And Catherine freaks out.
For good reason.
Yeah, because it's such a unhinged thing to do. She sees that the Tilneys are leaving and she literally runs after them. She chases them all the way home. She runs to their house. She pushes through the door they're arriving. The butler hasn't closed the door yet. She pushes her way through. She's panting. She's apologizing. She's sweating. And she's doing it in front of Henry and the general and Eleanor. And of it.
What a move.
And she's like, I'm so sorry. I did not tell him to do that. I want to walk with you more than anything I've ever wanted to do. And she's so overwrought. And the general finds this touching. Okay. They're all very swayed by this. And
that's nice.
Yeah. Until this sentence. The general, they agree. He tries to get her to stay for dinner as well. And she's like, the Allens will be worried about me. But I would love to come to dinner another time. So he's they've made their plans to do the walk. He's walking her back to the door. The general attended her himself to the street door, saying everything gallant as they went downstairs, admiring the elasticity of her walk, which corresponded exactly with the spirit of her dancing, and making her one of the most graceful bows she had ever beheld when they parted.
It sounds like he's talking about her like a horse.
I mean, on brand. The general from here on out is going to pay her a lot of attention.
Like too much attention?
In the end, no, but it reads that way.
Okay. It's giving what a fine filly.
Yes. What a fine little filly she is. So the next morning, weather's beautiful, and they go for the walk.
Yay, we finally made it.
Get to go for a walk. Bless. And we come to find out that the opposite of John is true of Henry, in that he loves to read and he loves novels. But she starts it with being like, you know, oh, but you probably don't read novels because of the way John has acted.
Sure. And she's only met 2 adult men she wasn't related to ever.
Exactly. Gentlemen read better books. And he says, the person, be it gentleman or lady, who has not pleasure in a good novel must be intolerably stupid. I've read all Miss Radcliffe's works, and most of them with great pleasure. And so now they bond, and there's like a lot of banter about reading and novels, and this is where you're like, Henry Tilney can kind of get it.
Yeah.
We're into that. What we also get is that dynamic that sometimes happens when you're like in the early stages of flirting or getting to know someone, where men want to teach you something.
Sure. Yeah.
I wrote, men love to teach a pretty girl something. Because it says, Catherine did not know her own advantages, did not know that a good-looking girl with an affectionate heart and a very ignorant mind cannot fail in attracting a clever young man.
Oh my God. It is depressing how much it is still incredibly true that like the easiest way to get a man to pay attention
Is be like,
to you
how do you do this?
is to act like you're stupid.
Yep.
And the easiest way to get a man angry at you
is to
do the inverse.
Is to prove that you know something. Oh, no. Walk goes splendidly. She feels like so bound to her new friends and feels like all this promise. And she's like, this is the best day of my life.
They understand her.
We love to read. Next morning, Catherine gets a note from Isabella that's like begging her to come and visit. So she arrives to find that Isabella and James are now engaged.
No!
And that James has set off to their parents' house to get their parents' blessing.
And Isabella's like, and I can't wait to be your sister. And then I'll be even more your sister when you marry my brother.
Yes. She makes this statement, you will be so infinitely dearer to me, my Catherine, than either Anne or Maria. Those are her sisters. I feel that I shall be so much more attached to my dear Morland's family than to my own. This was a pitch of friendship beyond Catherine. The idea of being like, who cares about my own siblings? Now you're my sibling, like, is too much for her. But she is very happy for her. And she has not seen Isabella for who she is yet. And so she's like, this is amazing. My bestie and my brother. As she's leaving, John sort of corners her and is like wistfully saying goodbye. But I say, Miss Morland, maybe I shall come and pay my respects at Fullerton before it is too long, if not disagreeable. So that's her family's house.
Uh-oh.
And she doesn't really like read it. She's like, oh, do, like my parents would love to see you. Very oblivious. He's like, what about this whole marriage thing? And she's like, oh, I don't know. Like, I'm very excited and happy for them.
Oh, baby.
And he says, and I hope, Miss Morland, you will not be sorry to see me. She says, oh, dear, not at all. There are very few people I am sorry to see. Company is always cheerful.
Oh, sweetie.
And it's sweetie. Like, yeah, we're not shutting this down in the way that we need to shut it down.
Read between one line. I am begging
you. She can't. So she kind of like darts around some and is like, all right, bye.
Just like a little too pure for this world.
She goes to dinner at the Tilneys, and Henry is very standoffish. And the general is very attentive. And she like can't really make heads or tails of why this is happening. She says, He had never said so little, nor been so agreeable, and in spite of their father's great civilities to her, in spite of his thanks and invitations and compliments, it had been a release to get away from her. It puzzled her to account for all this. It could not be General Tilney's fault. Well, maybe.
So, General Tilney, is he doing the thing that so many old men love to do, where they just are excited to be around a young, pretty woman, or is it more than that?
It's more than that, but it doesn't end up being in a creepy way, more in like a self-serving way.
Okay.
Intrigue!
But like from her perspective.
No, she's not in kind of that young person way too. She's like very uncomfortable with the attention, but not because it's from him, just because it's so profuse. It ends up making her feel more othered instead of more brought in, because he's paying so much more attention to her than his own children.
She's like, I'm a 17-year-old who doesn't know what to do with my hands. Why are you making me the center of attention?
Correct. And so she goes and she tells Isabel about how like weird Henry was, and she's like, well, I never liked him anyway.
God damn it, Isabel.
Exactly. She's like, I always knew he was trash. Then they go to a ball that night, and the Tilneys are super attentive. Henry dances with her and like tells her she's so good-natured, and doesn't say he's smitten, but he pays her a lot of attention. And it is at this dance that Henry's older brother, the captain, arrives.
Oh, so we had the general, and now
Yes.
we have the captain.
The captain, whose name is Frederick, but they don't reveal his name for some time. He also is just called the captain.
Wait, is the general grooming her for the captain, but Henry is the one who actually wants her?
Twist. No.
Oh,
Yeah.
damn.
Sorry.
Different novel.
But is one of hers. The captain, very handsome, very striking. And Isabella, prior to like going to the dance, had been like, I'm not going to dance with anyone.
Uh-oh.
Because in part, like their engagement is not common knowledge yet, but James is not back from their parents' house. And so she was like, I'm not going to dance with anyone because I just like my love for James is so pure and blah, 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 blah.
But she's gonna dance with the captain, I bet. This is an audio medium.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
I wish I could describe
Those eyes were not for the audio.
the eyes that I just got.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yes, Isabel does dance with him. Catherine is trying to get Henry to admit that it's improper for his brother to be dancing with Isabel because she's engaged, even though that's not common knowledge. Henry knows, but it's not common knowledge. And he sort of pushes back. I don't know what my brother knows. How do you know what anyone knows?
Yeah, fair enough.
It ends with him like being basic. Says, well then, I only meant that your attributing my brother's wish of dancing with Miss Thorpe to good nature alone convinced me of your being superior in good nature yourself to all the rest of the world. It's just like she's so naive that she can't imagine that her brother would want to dance with Isabel for any improper reasons.
Okay.
And he's a man of the world, but her childlike brain can't handle that. And that's making him horny, is basically what it says. Word for word.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Jane Austen loved using the word horny.
She used it a lot. When they get home, James has sent a second letter, and he elaborates on exactly what their father has granted him as far as a living and like the conditions of their marriage.
Sure.
And it is not what Isabel thought it was going to be. Apparently, there has been a low-level rumor, because the Allens have some money, that the Morlands also have money.
Oh.
And so their father's going to grant him $400 a year, 400 pounds a year. And they have to wait 2 to 3 years to get married because James and John are both still in school. They're schoolmates.
So they're at what, university?
Yes. And Isabella's like, well, I don't need the money, but I'm just like sad for James. Says, it is not on my own account I wish for more, but I cannot bear to be the means of injuring my dear Morland, making him sit down upon an income hardly enough to find one in the common necessaries of life. For myself, it is nothing. I never think of myself. And their mom's standing there and is like, you're right. You always are just thinking of everyone. I'm sure you'll make it work because you just feel so strongly for everyone. There was never a young woman so beloved as you are by everyone. And it's like, okay. And basically implies like, well, once he meets you in person, I'm sure that he'll give more money.
It is one of the things that I find so comforting about reading classic literature is the fact that there are types of people that appear to stretch back forever to the point where I am fairly certain that there were Anglo-Saxon women who were like, I never think of anyone. I never think of myself. I only ever think of others. While other people around them were like,
Are you sure? Her? Her?
just
And so Catherine sort of gently pushes back. Again, their mom implies, oh, I'm sure like once he meets you, he'll give you more money. And Isabella says,
oh yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to jump right over that. That's a wild supposition.
Yes.
Like you're gonna be
Wild.
You're gonna be
so
pretty.
charming and pretty and accomplished that he'll just give you more money a year. Insane.
If you're hot enough, your husband will. Oh God, that is actually kind of true.
And she says, nobody can think better of Mr. Moreland than I do, I'm sure. But everybody has their failing, you know, and everybody has a right to do what they like with their own money. Catherine was hurt by this insinuations. I am very sure, she said, that my father has promised to do as much as he can afford. She's like, oh, but you've found me out. Ah, my Catherine, you have found me out. There's the sting. The long, long, endless 2.5 years that are to pass before your brother can hold the living. And so she's trying to, like, couch it in the fact that it's not actually about the money. It's that I love him so much I want to marry him right now. And now we have to wait 2 years, even though we're 17.
She's like, oh, I didn't realize that you were pores.
And I forgot that I'm talking to you. Like, that's yeah, like so self-centered that you're just like, oh. To this statement, their overbearing mother says, yes, yes, my darling Isabella, we perfectly see into your heart. You have no disguise. We perfectly understand the present vexation, and everybody must love you the better for such a noble, honest affection.
Oh, yep.
But this softens. Catherine is like, okay. And so now we're going to wrap up this first part. We're now posed with the question in that the Allens had originally thought to stay in Bath 6 weeks. It's been 6 weeks. They finally decide, okay, we're going to stay for another fortnight.
So we have 2 more weeks to get this man to make a commitment to us, is what you're telling me.
Yes, this 26-year-old man to make a commitment to a 17-year-old rube with a child's heart and mind. Just a small little thing.
17-year-old rube would be such a cutting insult if deployed correctly.
It's like the edge of 17, but the lyrics are changed where you're an idiot who doesn't know anything. But it's beautiful in childlike wonder. And so she is so excited, she runs off to see Miss Tilney to be like, I have 2 more weeks. I thought we were going to be parted immediately, but look, no. And Eleanor is like, oh, sorry, boo. We're leaving at the end of the week.
Uh-oh.
But
in
comes the general to encourage his daughter by then just talking over her and not allowing her to say it, to invite her to come to their home, Northanger Abbey.
Oh!
She is in rapture.
They said the thing!
We said the thing! The title of the novel! She's so excited. She's in pure bliss, like true raptures. She is so excited. Not only that, it is made clear that she's not only excited because of the Tilneys, but also because the idea of what she thinks an old abbey would look like.
Sure.
It says, her passion for ancient edifices was next in degree to her passion for Henry Tilney. And castles and abbeys made usually the charm of those reveries which his image did not fill. To see and explore either the ramparts and keep of the one or the cloisters of the other had been for many weeks a darling wish.
Hey, baby.
You know what I'm into?
I'll show you my ancient edifice.
Wink! Can you imagine being a 17-year-old girl and having a narrator say about you, the only thing she loved more than this 26-year-old man was a dusty, musty old castle?
I mean, when I was 17, that would have been true. Unfortunately, on both counts.
A real bummer that it's true for me, so maybe I shouldn't make so much fun of Catherine Morland. I still would get excited about a dusty, musty castle. She's immediately, like, not only so excited about the Tilneys, but so excited about the idea of the Abbey and what it means, and for her, like, little gothic novel-addled brain. It says, its long, damp passages, its narrow cells and ruined chapel were to be within her daily reach, and she could not entirely subdue the hope of some traditional legends, some awful memories of an injured and ill-fated nun.
Yes.
An amazing.
Yes, queen.
Yes, we are so here for an injured and ill-fated nun.
Oh my god.
And so that's where we leave it. She's made the decision. The Allens say, sure, sounds good.
Yeah.
And because they are acting as her pseudo parents,
Right, in loco parentis.
yes, she agrees.
Cool.
And so in the next episode, we'll go to Northanger Abbey
Oh my god, I'm so excited.
and see what gothic terrors
await us
await
there.
us there.
Oh, I'm so
Yes.
excited.
Yes.
Well,
What do you think? Part 1. As we leave Bath, what are your guesses?
Okay, my guesses. I think the fact that she is a teenage rube is going to continue to be a problem.
Well, you've been a teenage rube before, haven't you? It was very problematic.
It caused a lot of problems, actually. Yeah. Especially because I was a teenage rube who was really good at seeming like I wasn't a rube.
Yep.
But I was still
Same.
absolutely a rube.
Same. That's what called being a former gifted and talented child is.
Parentified, former gifted and talented child.
Someone who's quote unquote wise beyond their years, an old soul.
Still a rube. An
Still
absolute
just a stupid little
idiot child.
idiot child.
I think we're going to get an 11th hour reappearance of the sketchy horse himbo.
John Thorpe.
John is going to reappear and do something shady as all get out. I'm still not entirely unconvinced that the captain and the general are going to be up to something. And I think we're going to get at least one good scene of running away from a castle at night in a nightgown carrying a candelabra.
Those are all good guesses.
Those are my guesses.
Stay tuned for part 2.
I'm really excited.
Yeah.
The only other thing I will say is knowing that she wrote this at the very beginning of her career, it really does kind of feel like you can see her working the kinks out of some things
Yes.
and also really establishing what are going to be some of her kind of beloved archetypes. I think a lot of writers especially don't want to admit that even great novelists kind of tend to like
Same bag.
reuse stuff.
Yeah.
You know? It feels like this is the birth of some of her much more successful, better rendered characters down the line. A lot of them feel a little more one note here.
They do read that way too, and I think that's why sometimes you see more of her fourth wall interjection.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of that was also maybe youth and like her own excitement of her own opinion.
Sure.
You know, like when you're young, you're like,
Yeah.
everything I have to say is deeply important.
I mean, how old was she when she was writing this? Roughly. Because obviously we don't know exactly when she would have started it, but...
It looks like she finished writing it in 1803. She was born in 1775, so like 28.
Okay. Yeah.
So not yet 30.
This also feels a lot more self-consciously satirical.
Yeah, it's funnier and not quite like I said. It's because I think it's different in some ways from her other stuff in that this is written in part to be a satire of Gothic novels.
Right.
And so I think she gets a little bit more hyperbolic with some of the stuff, which makes it funnier in some way. Like,
Yeah.
I enjoyed and like thought that this was a very fun read.
It makes me wonder if she realized that in order to be successful, she needed to up the romance, tone down the satire, make the male leads a little more brooding. Like some of these things that got smoothed out and then remained pretty constant through the rest of her oeuvre.
What I'm now thinking about is the fact that she wrote this in 1803. The first one to get published is Sense and Sensibility, and that's in 1811.
Yeah, that's
a pretty big chunk of time.
Yeah.
In between. But then I think, God, she pumped out Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Emma in 5 years.
Well, she
else was
nailed it.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it's like once you've got the template,
you can just kind of go.
What is similar to this that is true in all is her like happily ever after ending is like a page.
Yeah.
She wraps everything up, and you'll find there's some stuff that she wraps up in some even more convenient, like stupidly convenient ways than she does in other ones. I think that's something she definitely was like working on.
Look, man, endings are hard.
Look, no, you don't gotta tell me.
They are hard to write.
You don't gotta tell me.
All right. Well, thank you so much for staging yet another
seizure
of my of the good ship. Didn't read it.
That's us. Toot toot.
Thanks for being the captain again this week.
Toot toot.
I'm thinking of Major Payne.
Oh.
Toot toot. Something I haven't thought about in a long time.
Oh,
anyway,
here we are.
Again with the very fresh topical references.
That's us. Just the zeitgeist.
Maddie, is there anything that we want to platform before we leave for today?
I want everyone to go follow Didn't Read It on Instagram.
There we go.
That would bring me joy. And actually, like, between now and the next episode, like, this is not a hard book. It's not a particularly long book. This is one I do think is it was funny. Like, it's worth reading.
Well, there we go.
So
Maddie,
pick up a copy.
Maddie, who, full disclosure, is the one doing our social media and doing an incredible job of it,
wants you to go engage. Damn it.
Warmly invites you to come follow us on Instagram. And, between this week and next week, if you have the time, maybe consider doing a bit of a read-along with us.
Sure.
Yeah. And then go tell her on Instagram that you are.
Yes, that.
Make her very happy.
That.
In this brisk November as we slide toward the holidays.
Boy.
I know.
We're almost there.
All right. Well, Maddie, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could really use the love.
Bye.
Didn't Read It was created, written, recorded, and edited by me, Grace Todd. You can follow the show on Instagram or Twitter @Didn'tReadIt.
Our theme song is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.
For sources cited and a full list of episodes, you can visit us at didntreaditpod.com.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review. It makes a big difference, and we appreciate it immensely.
If you did not enjoy the show, we are accepting applications for a full-time nemesis at didntreaditpod@gmail.com. Special thanks to Black Iris Social Club in Richmond, Virginia, and to Pesca Trio Publishing.